Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here. Brian Murphy on his Monday morning trip journey to Jacksonville, where he is recording here this morning. Murph, you got the sunglasses on. The sun is out in Jacksonville. The vibes are, I guess, good because of a win. How we doing?
We're doing all right. I'm not, folks, I did have my share of cocktails at the tailgate, but this is not a hangover sunglasses look. This is a glare off the screen look. I'm trying to just be able to see Coller, see you as an audience, and not be squinting like Mr. Magoo. It's been a fun weekend so far, but there's just a lot of bad energy among the people that I was around because of this game, and I think there's a lot of obviously bad energy surrounding Sam Darnold right now. This is who they are. I don't see there being too many surprises with what we see, except for the sustained, the perpetual habits that Darnold seems to have about making bad decisions at the wrong time in the wrong place on the field. But at 7-2, can you complain? Who'd listen? If this wasn't Jacksonville, they weren't going to win this game. But they did have Jacksonville on the schedule. They have Tennessee on the schedule next week. They have Chicago the week after that. This is not a winning football formula per se, but you can win these games playing this way with that kind of defense, with that kind of accuracy from your kicker, and just keep watching through fan fingers on Sam Darnold, I guess.
Well, so this is the weird thing about that game. Is there's a lot of things that you could point to that you would say they can win with on a weekly basis, which is controlling the ball for 10 minutes on different drives, 15 play drives, running the football as effectively as they did. And then Brian Flores with his defensive plan. Yes, I understand it's the Jaguars, but they also completely shut them down. They had one successful drive, and the entire rest of the day, I don't even know, did they pass the 30-yard line of the Vikings? The rest of the entire day, it was sacks, it was interceptions, it was confused Mac Jones. They shut down Travis Etienne. I mean, it was, in my mind, a very good performance outside of three throws. But the problem is that based on Sam Darnold's history, those three throws are not an aberration. It's not
Right.
like, so people were comparing it to Jared Goff's 5 interceptions. Jared Goff doesn't throw a lot of interceptions. That's a very weird, probably won't ever happen again in that guy's life. He might never throw 3 again, but Darnold probably will. And I think, Murph, what dug so deep into people's brains yesterday in terms of the anger and annoyance was, I mean, of course, you feel like you should be beating Jacksonville by more. But I also think it's that everybody knows that the rest of the guys on that team yesterday played well, and they were let down by their quarterback in a game where they should have won by 27 points. And then you start looking into the future going, okay, if you get to a playoff game and you have a good enough roster from number 2 to number 53 to win, and number 1, the quarterback, ends up throwing red zone interceptions and you lose a playoff game, that's going to drive everybody crazy because they have a good enough roster to be right there with any team.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a lot of wiggle room in sort of in Darnold's sample size here to really feel like that this, I think, as you mentioned, it's not an aberration. It's sort of who he is. And maybe people were a little more skeptical and thought it would emerge in weeks 1 through 4 or 1 through 5 or more symptoms of that. Instead, it's sort of been drip, 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 starting, the second half in Green Bay, obviously the Detroit game, the Rams game, the Colts game. This one was even worse. And it just feels like he's gotten progressively either more trying to force throws, more panicky, a little less comfortable in his decision-making. The games that I've been at in person, which were the Detroit game and this game in Jacksonville in the stands, I mean, you could see him getting the protection. You could see him going through his progressions. And you're looking over here to the right, and there's Aaron Jones wide open, or there's Jordan Addison, or there's somebody there. And then you see him throwing where all the bodies are into a window that I don't think was open at any time. And you're like, what are you could he was telegraphing it. And then the other ones were just poor throws. So is it poor decision making times the poor throw equals this is who Sam Darnold is? Probably he's going to have one or the other in a lot of his throws, and yet he's also the guy that can drop back 5 yards in his end zone and clear midfield to Justin Jefferson on a third down play. So Kevin O'Connell has the biggest challenge facing him yet, which is how to manage Darnold right now, how to keep him in the place in the locker room where he needs to be. And I think a lot of the post-game speech was aimed toward that, soothing, Darnold's maybe wounded ego a bit, saying we've got your back. But now it's going to be, okay, when does he try to let him loose? You're going to have J.J. Jefferson chomping at the bit. Now you've got Addison coming into form. Hockenson clearly, we knew how productive and how much of a weapon he could be. I think that was clearly on display yesterday. Josh Oliver, they've got 4 or 5 different options to throw to. I just don't know how many bullets O'Connell's going to be willing to fire at this point. And as you get into more playoff contending matchups, when you get Seattle down the road and you get Green Bay, Cardinals are pretty decent, you're going to have to open it up a little more. You can play conservative and rely on your defense in Jacksonville, Tennessee, Indianapolis, and maybe even Chicago. So going forward, what is going to be the level of expectation for Darnold and the level of confidence O'Connell has in letting him turn loose? Could be fun to watch, or mind-blowing to watch.
Yeah, so I'm trying to live in 2 different worlds, which is reacting to exactly what we saw yesterday, which is Sam Darnold, not just 3 interceptions, but 3 of his fault interceptions, bad choices of where to put the football. Justin Jefferson was getting mauled by the corner, and he just throws it there anyway when there was no lane at all. That was a tipped one, but still, that's not a good throw. The other 2 were unexplainable, inexcusable. Also still need something from the refs to tell me how one of them was an interception. Maybe it's a different game if they get a touchdown instead of an interception there. And we're only talking about 2 picks, but nonetheless, it was still a deserved interception that he threw nowhere close to his receiver. The O'Connell part of it is tough for me because when a play caller has 84 plays, 82 plays to work with and gains 400 yards, it's really hard for me to go, wow, you screwed up, man, because every single week, every single franchise in the NFL would take 82 plays, 400 yards, 5 yards of play. But I do think that there are ways where Kevin O'Connell can curb Sam Darnold's Sam Darnoldiness. One of them would be not trying to run a play action on 3rd and 1 to put a dagger in the team when you're running great the entire day and you've worn the other team down. This is why you do it. This is why you have 10 play drives. So you get to the 4th quarter and that defense is gassed and you hand it off and you get 1 yard and you go home. And instead, it's not just a fail because you could have gone for it on 4th down. Now it's a 7-yard fail because it's a sack. And when you get into the red zone, it's not something little underneath that someone can catch and run. It's got to be a full field of receivers running into the end zone. I think that there are things that he's going to have to look at to say, this is a moment where I've set him up to screw up. And I think that red zone is where he gets anxious and it gets tight in there. And they don't run for touchdowns. They don't really run in the red zone in general. And they threw, I believe, 1 screen pass yesterday, which is another way to just get Sam Darnold moving. The easy button stuff is not being given to him, I think, even as much as it was early in the season.
Yeah, and I think it's, again, when you're talking about O'Connell, it's, we don't really have a track record of him pivoting mid-season with a philosophy or a game plan or adjusting to, I mean, last year it was slapdash with all of his quarterbacks. So you can't really measure that. He tried to tailor game plans to guys that were arriving on Tuesday to win. And that's hard to really compare with what he needs to do with Darnold, who he's clearly had in-house since April. So what is he going to want to do on that? And I hope he's asked about that going forward too, is at what point do you have to step in, and how much is it you stepping in and boosting his ego and not, as you said, what all good managers need to do in any job is not put their employees in positions to fail, put them in positions to succeed. And if they exceed that, and if they end up going, say, off script, they have the confidence of the coaching staff, and they also have the confidence in themselves to make something happen. I don't think Darnold's there. I think Darnold has now reached a point where he's got to be thinking in the back of his mind, do I force this in to make a big play to overcome some mistakes in the past? Am I doubting what I'm seeing? Are other teams picking up on that? They must be. There's more confusion in there. Because I felt like the protection was really good yesterday. And you mentioned he has a tendency to run backwards into sacks, but he did elude a lot of pressure, as he's done the last couple of weeks, to keep drives alive. I've kind of been impressed with how he's been able to pull it down, recognize that, have time to go through his progressions, but the plays collapse, and now he's got to take off. He hasn't been hesitant in doing that. So I just would love to crack open that head and find out where he's at. He's not all that really self-reflective or, effusive in his post-game comments. So you got to wonder where this is at on him mentally. Is he in a here I go again mode? I mean, you couldn't blame him if that's what he thought. He still had more success here than he's had in his previous stops. But there are things that are baked into the Sam Darnold profile that are really tough to avoid. So it's a matter of, can you ride the roller coaster and bring everyone along with you in the locker room and still set yourself up for maybe January success? I don't see that today. I think the next few weeks, as we see how Darnold responds to this whole, loss of confidence, if that's what you want to call it, what it becomes. Is it what he's going to be the rest of the way? Is it going to be a week-to-week headache? Is it going to be something he can write off with some soft opponents? The NFL doesn't make it easy for people to try to find themselves.
Friends, gifting is hard, but here's a hint. Give the gift of connection from US Cellular. Not sure what that means? Here's a slightly more specific hint. You could choose 4 free phones and get 4 lines for $90 a month from US Cellular. Your family wants new phones? How do we know? They told us. The good news is that compared to wrapping presents, you're great at taking hints. So take a hint and get 4 free phones and 4 lines for $90 a month. US Cellular, built for us. Have you ever tried to explain football to a little kid? It can be near impossible to make it make sense, but there's help. I want to tell you about Future Fans, a new brand that helps little kids become big fans with storybook-led activity boxes. As an example, they've created a beanbag toss that has 4 tries to teach the downs in football. Just imagine your kid asking to watch along with you on Sundays. If you want to share your love for football with the little one, a grandkid, a niece, a nephew, Future Fans is the best gift for a sports fan and their little one this holiday season. It's only $49.99 at futurefans.com and use the code PURPLE to get 10% off. Again, that's futurefans.com, code PURPLE to unlock a lifetime of memories with a kid in your life. Starting now. No, it does not. And this is where it comes to the big picture part of this for me. So I was looking back at 2021, the season that got Kevin O'Connell hired here by the Minnesota Vikings with the Los Angeles Rams. The league leader in interceptions, 2021, was also the Super Bowl champion, Matthew Stafford, who came to Minnesota that year, threw 3 interceptions, and beat the Vikings at US Bank Stadium in a really miserable and ugly game for Stafford, who went through a dip that year that they lost 3 games in a row. They barely survived the Vikings game, and everybody thought, okay, the Rams and their all-in approach, it's not going to work for them. And then when it came to playoff time, Stafford got hot, and they ended up going to the Super Bowl and winning it. Now, no, Sam Darnold is not Matthew Stafford. He doesn't have the resume to argue he was Matthew Stafford, but it's a very similar approach with a big arm dude who makes kind of brain dead decisions as Matthew Stafford used to do, trying to use the arm in ways that would cause problems for him. And Stafford used to take a lot of sacks trying to make extra plays too. I think this is part of a philosophy that's similar to what we saw for Bruce Arians for years, the no risk it, no biscuit, where you are going to lean into the variance and just ride that wave and try to guide your team through it with positivity, hoping that on the other side of it is the upswing for Sam Darnold. And we've seen the upswing when they went for the first 4 games, how good he can be. I guess my only question is, have defenses kind of figured something out that's causing this? But it doesn't feel like it. It feels like these are just bad decisions. The last 2 weeks, he's played really well outside of these high red zone interceptions. So I think if you're O'Connell, you're probably looking at this and going, I'm just going to keep throwing my home run hitter up there. And if he strikes out sometimes, we'll have to try to make up for it.
Because he also knows he's got a great defense and pitching staff behind him on the other side of the ball, if you want to ride out the baseball metaphor. I mean, yeah, the Vikings are in a position where if Darnold is going to be this erratic and this, oh my God, moments every game, they have a defense that can bail him out. The problem with that is how much stress are you going to be putting on that defense throughout the year? It's a theme we've talked about every week. That's the beauty of even yesterday's ugly win, was that the Vikings were on the field the whole time. So the defense came up with big plays because they were in a position, they weren't gassed. The field position wasn't awful every time. And I feel like we've said this all along, so much intrigue about Darnold and the offensive weapons, and that's all fine and good. But this team is defined by and only going to succeed by the level of play of its defense. And they had a little bit of a lull, but there's been a real good bounce back, I think, from Flores. Yesterday was fantastic. He's still going to have a chance to go down to Nashville and make it uncomfortable for the Titans. I just feel like they're in a position where if the defense isn't going to score once a week, they're going to put you in a position to get an easy score somewhere along the way, because there's just big-time playmakers everywhere. So, but the question is, can you sustain that over the next 10 weeks, 9 weeks into January if your defense is run ragged? At a certain point, that's going to crack. So that's the balancing act. That's why I feel like they can afford to, as you say, no risk, no biscuit. What's your alternative? You've got all these weapons. You can't get too conservative. You got to take your chances. And managing Darnold, managing what he sees, what he thought he saw in his film reviews, what defenses are throwing at him, and how O'Connell can kind of steer him through this crisis, as it were, is what's really going to, I think, ultimately, we're going to look back on the season and go, when they went from 5-0, let's say they get to 9-2, but everybody's worried about Sam Darnold. How are they going to manage all that going forward? And that's going to be, I think, the new thing to watch is how O'Connell and or Darnold can pull themselves out of this. And if they don't, will it even matter if they can still win games 12-7? They're not going to beat Seattle 12-7. They can beat Tennessee and Jacksonville 12-7. All that being said, they're fun to watch, and it feels like they're a team that is growing. They're winning ugly. They're dealing with adversity, and all of this stuff adds up and matters. Because it does feel like it's them and Detroit are the class of the NFC North. Detroit may be the class of the NFL at this point until Kansas City loses, but it feels like the Vikings have now positioned themselves as North contenders who are flawed but not fatally flawed, and who aren't as predictable or as reliable as we thought they might have been after turning 5-0. But again, we're still talking about a 7-2 team that Vegas had at 6.5 wins.
Yeah, and all of that and trying to bake that into a reaction to a game is tricky for me, like juggling the different balls here, because I want to go back and talk about, hey, if Darnold does this in a playoff game, you're going to lose. But as you said, what is the alternative? There isn't one. There isn't another quarterback. There isn't a benching. There isn't anything like that. Also, why would you do that when the guy has had such high highs? He's done this before, and we're just going to assume that he's going to stay as this quarterback. After the first 4 games, we were all saying he probably can't sustain that level of play. Then when the regression comes, we're like, oh, this is who he really is. No, that's not how roller coasters work. They go up and down. And hey, by the way, we called it the Kirk coaster because Kirk Cousins would do the same stuff at times, just in a different type of way. But he would also have his ups and downs.
He was risk averse, though.
Right. In a different way. And I think that's where I come back to as well, as we need to keep perspective on the fact that this is a really entertaining season and that we don't know where it's headed. To get to 7-2, there haven't been many seasons in the last 20 years where the Vikings have been 7-2. And somebody said to me, "Oh, this is just like 2022 yesterday." BS it is, because yes, okay, it was a 1-score win, but that was a elite defense that was completely shutting down another team and winning you a football game. That was not happening in 2022. The defense is so much different. Also, the high end of the quarterback that we've seen this season is also different. So I think taking one game and saying, "Oh, well, they're just never going to score and he's going to throw interceptions every game." Well, that's not going to happen either. Just like he wasn't going to throw 3 touchdowns and complete 90% of his passes in every game. But I look around the league, Murph, and I see a lot of teams that are flawed. Washington lost to Pittsburgh yesterday. Detroit nearly lost and then barely had to pull it off at the end with a 50-yard field goal. And how about the Falcons just completely getting outplayed by a really bad New Orleans Saints team? Which team is just perfect that you could never beat if you're the Vikings? And that's why I'm not going to move after this one game that wasn't impressive. I'm not going to say, "Oh, well, they're no longer a contender." So, no, they absolutely are when you look at the rest of the teams in the NFC.
Yeah, I mean, they've been a very bad contending team over the last few weeks. That's the best way to put it. And I don't view their recent struggles as indicative of where the whole season's going to go. But the notion that, well, you got to bench Darnold to either send a message, punish him, or just eliminate the mistakes. It's like, okay, and then what? Nick Mullins is going to go out and win 5 more games for you? I mean, it's clear. Or you're going to go out and grab another big arm off the street because he's available, and he's going to he's going to match Darnold's 9 months of prep in 3 days for your next game. I mean, these are over the top, reactionary, unrealistic, "I'm mad because I'm yelling at my TV" moments. You better get used to it, because I think this is where he's at. I don't think Darnold is going to be throwing 3 red zone interceptions a game, or the earth may split open at some point. But I do believe that he is going to find himself in situations where his decision-making may determine whether this drive fizzles or ends up on the 20-yard line of the other team. And that's where I think O'Connell has to come in and take maybe some of the stress off him inside the 20, 25-yard line. Don't abandon the run. As you said, maybe not put 5 guys in the end zone to throw to, because now you got 5 defenders and it's just a war zone out there. Whereas, can you work underneath inside 20 yards? Can you find ways for Darnold to play safe so that he doesn't get tempted to force a throw to Jefferson, because Jefferson's been double teamed all game, hasn't gotten his numbers, hasn't gotten his yards, and oh, by the way, it looks like he's single covered. Hawkinson showed, as he did last season, if you're going to take away J.J. Jefferson, you can't account for him. And it may not be sexy, 8 yards at a time, but that's how you win football games. And I feel like Jefferson's going to have his moments, because they're not going to be able to hold him down forever. The question is Darnold going to be able to recognize when those moments come and deliver, or is he going to be feeling like he has to force a pass into the end zone because it's 3rd down and I threw a pick the last drive? Or that's why I would love to know what he sees in his film review, how he self-assesses. He's not going to reveal that publicly, but that's really what's going on here. And is he going to be able to process that as a grizzled, hardened, neglected, rejected quarterback who's got some scar tissue to deal with that? Or is he going to maybe go down a rabbit hole of self-doubt and questioning himself, which clearly happened in New York and Carolina?
My theory.
Yeah, go ahead.
My theory on the interceptions is they all seem to have a pretty similar theme, which is he goes through his progression and then he sees something kind of flash, as the way that Kevin O'Connell talks about it, and thinks, "Oh, I can do that with my arm," because he's always done that just his entire career at USC, and he's always done it at other places that has caused problems. It's sort of this thing that pings in his mind. Like if you, not that you or I are like this, but let's say that if you curse all the time and you're trying to stop yourself from swearing, it's going to take a long time. But usually that sort of instant reaction of, oh, I bumped my knee. Oh, bleep. It's sort of like, oh, a guy's open, throw. And there isn't something that you can necessarily coach there. They just kind of have to work. And some of his best throws this year have been like that, where he just sort of sees it flash and lets it rip, and we go, what an arm. And then other times we go, what happened? But the biggest thing is not even the decision of where to throw, but I think the actual throw, when it flashes like that, he loses his technique for throwing. His feet don't get set. He doesn't get a full body into it. And then it's just a bad throw, and it ends up getting picked off. And this is why you just have to ride through that variance. It's kind of like with a strikeout home run hitter, you could say to them, why do you keep striking out? Because when they have big swings, they get off sometimes. And then it takes a while to get back onto it. And there isn't an easy answer of, oh, well, O'Connell should just do this. In fact, I want to say over the last 2 weeks that O'Connell has done a tremendous job of adjusting, because the biggest issue facing them was that they weren't on the field very much. The only times they ever scored were quick drives, and then they'd have 3 and outs, and the defense would get worn down. Well, that wasn't the case at all yesterday, where it was all long drives, the same with Indianapolis. So after yesterday, after seeing the Lions game, what happened to the Bears, where do you feel like this Vikings team fits in? And the Eagles, by the way, put on a heck of a show against the Dallas Cowboys, and they are on their way, Philadelphia, to turning around their season. Another example, by the way, of the roller coaster, because Nick Sirianni was going to get fired after like 3 weeks, and now they are completely rolling. So where do they fit in here?
Well, I think it seems clear now. The record says they're a wild card contender. They're still in contention with Detroit. Detroit just feels like, and I'm not being a homer on this, I'm just telling you what I see. I just feel like they feel like a team of destiny, because the things that are happening for them, the way they're able to win big games in big moments, those are teams that really, they're on their way somewhere. And they've already experienced some difficulty last year at the end, losing in San Francisco. They feel like they're on a mission. There's a lot that can happen, and clearly they could have some things go wrong in January as well. But the way this team looks, the way it feels, they're probably going to run away with the division. If the Vikings can be within a game going into Week 18 at Ford Field, and that'll be a hell of a clash. But there's just, as flawed as the Lions are, they're flawed in a sort of entertaining, they're equipped to overcome this way. The Vikings are still trying to figure out if they're going to be equipped long-term to overcome some of the things that Darnold and the offense are doing. I would argue that the Vikings defense is better than Detroit. So that, what factor is that going to have going forward when you're going to have some low-scoring games and some bad weather and some, it just feels like as the season goes on, the Vikings are going to be chasing Detroit. I feel like, Green Bay, there's obviously going to be question marks with Love all the way through. They've shown some moments where you doubt their viability. In the Bears, boy, has there ever been a single play that has just daggered a franchise on and off the field as much as that Hail Mary in Washington a few weeks ago? I mean, the locker room is imploding. The coaching staff is imploding. It's really a sad thing to see. I never really had too many feelings about the Bears franchise. I know they can't get out of their own way, particularly at the quarterback position, but to watch a team just literally fall apart in the middle of the season is a rarity. So I'm almost looking at this as like a biological miracle to kind of study and be impressed by. And you can tell generations down the road, this is what happens when you make one bad play and you're undisciplined at the wrong time. It can completely inject poison into an organization. So I don't see the Bears going anywhere anytime soon, other than just cleaning house and starting over again. So long story short, it feels like Philly is emerging again as an NFC power. Atlanta, we were wondering about, but I don't know how you lose to a team that is that bad and just can their coach. Seattle, LA, there's still some teams emerging. Vikings are in a really good position because, again, they should be able to pick up at least 1 or 2 more wins the next couple of weeks. they are in a position because of the early success that they had to ride out some adversity and to ride out some poor performances. And there's going to be a clunker defeat coming. I mean, whether it's Darnold's fault or whether it's just a combination of some mistakes or bad special teams, there's going to be a game where they blow. There hasn't been a game where you felt like they blew yet. So it's all coming. And it's how they're going to manage it. I think how they're going to manage it emotionally. They seem like, from a distance, a team that can weather a lot of that. But the Darnold stressors are going to be immense in the next few weeks if they don't correct. And I think people are so also emotionally attached to all of these plays because they're all red zone interceptions or within the 25-yard line. So you do have this long, sustainable 10-play drive, and you're on the doorstep. Now everybody's almost anticipating disaster, and now it's becoming manifest destiny a little bit. So it's kind of all of this. If he threw it at midfield on the first series, maybe people wouldn't lose their minds with how ugly it looked. But because it's the same look, it's the same bad decision / poor throw into coverage that everybody in the building sees is there. It seems to be a flaw every time they get down into the red zone. So I want to see how people react if he does it again in Tennessee. I want to see how O'Connell reacts if he does it again in Tennessee, because are you going to overreact now, or are you going to stick with what you know, which is he's probably going to come back and make the throws on the next drive that he needs to make because he's pretty resilient. But how much risk do we want to keep taking when we're inside the 20-yard line?
Just to circle back to the Chicago Bears, I think that their response to the Hail Mary really showed what was really going on behind the walls, because we've seen under O'Connell a lot of things go wrong, and we've never seen a team start calling out the coaching staff and then things like that. They had the bad loss against the Rams, and we didn't see immediately second guessing of what they were doing defensively and calling out and I think we don't see that in Kansas City or Buffalo or places where they've had success and they believe in their coach. It's more I think a signal, instead of saying it was just a random thing, it was a bad bounce, that's why we lost, we outplayed them, it was fine, just got a bad bounce. It was, let's point fingers at everybody, because that's what's really going on here behind the scenes. It was almost an opportunity for them to let the floodgates open and say what was really on their minds for the entire season. And just instructively for the rest of the league, if a coach is on the hot seat, don't pair them with a rookie quarterback. You have to fire Matt Eberflus after last year and find the coach for Caleb Williams. Now they're probably going to have to fire Eberflus and bring in a new coach and then have him learn a new system and all these things that I'm sure Sam Darnold's eye is twitching reading about it. Like, it's exactly what they did to him.
With Todd Bowles. Chicago. Yeah.
Yep. With Todd Bowles was his coach. They fired him. They brought in Adam Gase, and all hell broke loose from there on Sam Darnold. So let me go back real quick to the bigger picture also, which is at the beginning of the season, the mantra we settled on, Murph, was let's just see what happens, because we didn't know what we were supposed to think of this team. We didn't know what was around the corner. I don't think that we can change that. They're in position to race for the NFC, and maybe yesterday was their clunker and they survived and they'll get it turned around, but we don't know. We don't have patterns from the past on this team, this defense, this Sam Darnold. This is not the Kirk years where we always knew where the train was going. So I think there was a lot of overreaction, probably the angriest people had been after a win that maybe I've ever seen. I just thought, okay, well, you did win the game and you did outplay the other team. On to the next week. You have to get these at some point during the season. You're not going to beat everyone by 30 points. So anywho, tell me about your trip. This was your big trip. Go to Jacksonville with the boys. Every year you have one where you go on the road. Did you have a good time?
Yeah, and it's still ongoing. We have an 8 p.m. departure, so we got to get out of the house we rented here in Jacksonville Beach within the hour. It's winding down. It was a good scene. And, I was fine. I'm always meeting new people that are either adjacent to this group, or we meet people that are here, or other Vikings fans, that was basically US Bank Stadium South yesterday. What I also noticed too is Jaguar fans, God love them. They're gracious folks, nice people. They're just used to snowbirds coming down here to kick their team's butt. and take advantage of the weather. So they kind of just, they give you the stadium. They say, hey, welcome. When you speak of us well. There's not an angry, Philadelphia, how dare you wear purple, I'm going to shank you kind of vibe here. What I love about this trip, though, is it's a lot of similarly aged guys, a little bit scattered around the country. They're all huge Vikings fans. I've been having fun with them about the Lions a little bit, but it's not so much about the game. It's about the experience. It's about hanging out together. It's about, checking out, walking in the beach. We saw Joan Jett and the Blackhearts Saturday for free because I don't think I'd pay to see her now. But there's just little things you find along the way that we don't even expect. Random people you meet at a restaurant or a bar that are either from Minnesota or I've got some military guys in this group, so it's Veterans Day today. They're kind of bonding with the big military town down here in Jacksonville, and they keep reminding me I'm 4-0 on all these trips I've come with them to chronicle. It was LA in 21 against the Chargers, Washington in 22, Vegas, which was an uglier game than yesterday, and a victory, and now here in Jacksonville. So I don't know where the schedule is going to take us next season, but I don't think they want me to not come anymore because I'm 4-0.
Well, also, I had mentioned to a couple of fellow media members that you were doing this trip, and they all said, ooh, can't wait for the Murph article. So purpleinsider.com will be, when that goes up a little later in the week, the tale of your time in Jacksonville. 7-2, Murph. How many wins do you think they end up with? Let's
we keep going there. I've been saying 10/11, but now, even as flawed as they look, I'm going to say 11/12.
Okay.
Just because they're stacking them up.
I
think Detroit's like
disagree.
13-14, so I do feel like it's going to be a home wild card game. They might be targeting here.
I don't disagree. Some very winnable games still on the way. Murph, I'm glad you had a great time in Jacksonville. I was able to catch my flight yesterday. Myself and Ben Gessling in the Star Tribune scrambling through the Florida rains to catch our lift ride to the airport. And then they pull my bag, because this always happens with all the equipment that I carry. They always pull my bag out of line. Got to take another look at it. I'm going, we're boarding. Come on. So I got to the gate just as everybody's going in, made it back just fine. So a decent trip nonetheless. So thanks for your time as always, and enjoy your final couple of hours there in Jacksonville.
All right. Thanks, everyone.